Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Creative Piecemeal Podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Today, I am with cellist Jennifer Kloetzel. She's a graduate of the Juilliard School and a Fulbright Scholar. She has concertized throughout the United States, Europe, and Asia as a soloist and chamber musician. Jennifer Kloetzel is a founding member of the San Francisco-based Cypress String Quartet from 1996 to 2016. She has toured the globe and performed at such renowned venues as Lincoln Center, the Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, the Chautauqua Institute, and the Ravinia Festival, the Lobkowicz Palaces in both Vienna and Prague, as well as prominent colleges and conservatories worldwide. Ms. Kloetzel is noted for her elegant playing and her vibrant tone, and she is sought after recitalist, performing concerts for San Francisco performances and on WQXR in New York. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tammy. It's great to be here.
The last time we saw each other was a quartet performance many, many years ago. And since then, you've moved on and you are now a professor at University of California, Santa Barbara.
That's correct, yes. So when the quartet disbanded in 2016, I was left with the whole, what comes next. And without even any moments going by, it was like a week between the quartet ending and me first being hired as a lecturer of cello and chamber music at UC Santa Barbara. And then 2 years later, I auditioned for and won the job of assistant professor. And just this year was promoted, double promoted, actually up to full professor. So going well.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm excited about that. That was something good that happened during the pandemic times, I'll say. But I've also, I also have kept up with a lot of performing. I still do a lot of chamber music and actually quite a bit more solo playing than I had done with the 20 years in the quartet. It was hard to find the time to do that. And it's something that really is meaningful to me. So I'm thrilled I was thrilled that was going really well before everything shut down. So
Yes. I'm sure it's quite an adjustment now. You're maybe finding yourself with a little more free time than you anticipated.
I sure am. And it was hard because if you think about that, it took a little while of adjusting and sort of making sure that there were concerts and letting it be known that I was free to play these concerts. And so I had a very beautiful schedule set up for last season, which started out great and all the way through to my last concert that happened in March. And then I had about 20 more performances between March and June, every single one of which, of course, got canceled. So, but hope is on the horizon that we will come back and that they will return those kinds of concerts. So, but yeah, it has given me a moment to step back and reflect and figure out passion projects and things like that.
It seems like many of the artists I talk to, when they find themselves with a little more time, they're sort of digging in more into what they enjoy that they haven't had a chance to do before.
That is true. It was funny because I think when it first happened, it did feel like the brakes were put on so quickly. Flights were canceled. I had so many different flights that got canceled. And then all of this music that I had learned but had nothing to do with it. I felt like a racehorse who wasn't allowed to run for a while. But I kind of just slowed everything down. I started taking more walks. I had, at that time to do things like puzzles, the big jigsaw puzzles. I hadn't done jigsaw puzzles in years and reading books and things. And now I am so busy. I can't believe how busy I am not actually leaving home that much. So it's amazing how everything fills in. I think that just happens to some people. You just get busier and busier.
So we're going to backtrack to your past. And I was curious, who or what inspired you to become a musician?
Sure. Gosh, let's see. So I come from a relatively large family. I'm one of 4 kids, and my mother was an opera singer and my father was a biology professor. But and who also loves music very much. So each one of us was encouraged to play piano and another instrument, to choose another one as well. So music was around us all the time. as were all kinds of museums and sports and dance and science and you name it. And, so all these opportunities were presented to us as children, and we were encouraged to find our own way. So that was wonderful. And I loved so many things, and tried a lot of them out. And music was always there. And it wasn't until I was finishing up high school, actually, even though I'd had a lot of success already as a musician, it was only when I was finishing up that I decided that I would go to music school and see what that brought. So, I can't say it's any one thing or one teacher or something, but it's just the collective of all of that experience, I think, leading me forward.
That sounds like a wonderfully nurturing and happy childhood.
Yes, it actually really was. And my siblings all do interesting and unique things. And I think that's a credit to my parents in the way that they just allowed us to find our own ways.
So you obviously eventually landed on cello, but if you could play any other instrument, is there one that you want to do that you haven't learned or that you would like to pick back up?
Yeah, so actually, when I was young, I studied piano and cello, and I sang a lot. I sang both in chorus and choirs and solos, and I sang in the musicals in school, and I sang jazz, and I did all that. So actually, I wish the thing I would love to pick back up if I had the time would be the singing part of it. I still, noodle around on the piano a little bit. I have a 14-year-old son who plays piano, so I had to, when he was first starting out, I had to make sure I remembered what I was doing to help coach him through things. Now he plays better than I do. So, but at one time I was equally good in all these things, and ballet and drama and poetry. And, the hardest part for me leaving those teenage years was, what am I going to focus on? Because I like all of these things. So when I arrived at Juilliard as a freshman, it was quite a shock to me to have to suddenly just buckle down and study cello. And I did. I sort of eased into that, but I also did things like start a student council and, things there too, because I couldn't just put all of my energy in there. I like too many things.
And Juilliard is in the heart of such an artistic city. Is there a
Yes.
favorite memory from your time there that you would like to share?
Oh my goodness. There are, the wonderful thing about being there at Lincoln Center was how much in the middle of everything you are, and how easy it was to go to concerts. And students were also given opportunities to play, to attend master classes with some of the greats, and to just be around all of that energy and that art and that music. It was phenomenal. I mean, I got to see idols of mine. So one of my idols growing up was Leontine Price, the soprano. Incredible. She was, my mother was a soprano, so I was like literally raised from a tiny infant listening to Leontine Price, and I got to see one of her amazing master classes at Juilliard, and just being around that all the time. Actually, fun fact, the only person I've ever written fan mail to is Leontine Price. So she didn't write back, but that's okay. I just told her how much she meant to me and how much her music meant.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
I know that I lived up on the East Coast for a brief period of time, and I kick myself for not going to as many concerts as I wanted to fit in.
It's hard when you're a student because you have so much going on, but I was lucky that I did have all this energy too. And then, the fact that they would give us tickets to all kinds of things. So I got to see, Rostropovich's 60th birthday concert in Carnegie Hall. He gave a set of concerts and I went to them all. And he played something like, 6 or 9 concertos in 3 nights. I forgot what it was. It was something incredible. Another one of my idols to be able to see there. And, violinist Anna-Sophie Mutter was playing Beethoven Concerto in Carnegie. Also got free tickets to go see that. And I went back the next night. I was so moved by it, and was then able to study what was different about the performances and learn a lot from that. I think attending performances teaches you so much about performing and also how people approach the concert experience.
It really does. And, like you said, not only is it moving, but it's inspiring, motivating. And then, of course, from an analytical side, being a student, sort of nitpicking like, oh, that's how they phrase that, or that's the way they do their bowing. And suddenly it opens up a whole new field for someone.
Right. Especially, I've always pride myself on being curious, and it's something I encourage all my students. My students will quote me as saying, be more curious, and that's something I always say. Go seek out other ways to do things. Try every fingering and bowing possible. Listen to how many different people do this in different ways, and then come to your own conclusion. Then drop all that aside and then figure out your way forward. But do educate yourself in that way.
It sounds like you get a lot of inspiration from a variety of creative arts, not just music or not just cellists. Would you say that anyone in specific had a really big influence on your life as a cellist?
Well, of course, growing up, I was a young blonde female cellist, and so I'd have to say Jacqueline Dupre, because there weren't that many that I knew of female cellists. I've since, learned about many more, but at that time she was really well known, and people would always kind of compare me to her just because of the female blonde thing, I think, and the cello. And so I, began to listen to everything she did and learn all about her, which then led me, after I completed my degree at Juilliard, I went to London on a Fulbright grant to study with her teacher, William Pleath. And that was all based on that inspiration of sort of falling in love with what she was doing with her playing. It's funny how the trajectory works, though. There was a period of time where I adored her playing, and then there was a period of time where I just didn't. I found it, I was going through something of a different kind of renaissance where I felt like it was a little, hysterical, a little too much. And now I have gained such an appreciation for the personality that she brought. And that's something that's so important to me, that we develop our individual styles of playing and what we bring to the table. Because I feel like sometimes, because the world is so open now, it's so easy to hear people from all over. Sometimes it's a little too homogenous how we all sound. And I think we all need to find our own voice, because there's got to be a place for all of us in there if we find our own way.
Agreed. Especially because, that's the importance of art, is creative expression and putting your own spin on it. I mean, I also love Jacqueline Dupre, and I can't tell you how many times, you go and listen to someone else's performance, whether it's a female or a male, and it's like, oh, they sound just like Jacqueline Dupre. It's like, oh, they really should deviate and find their own version.
Well, and I was remembering the first time I heard her famous Elgar performance, and there are, of course, 2 recordings of it, but the one that I fell in love with the most, and then realizing later that there were other performances. Actually, there was a performance with Beatrice Harrison playing, with Elgar himself conducting, and the performance could not be more different than the Dupre one, and yet Elgar was involved in that. So that already there is such a lesson, right? Is that everybody expects it to sound this one way, but there's this whole other way it could sound. And that's part of that exploration that I'm curious about, that I'm interested in.
And speaking of curious, now that there's a little more time on your hands, do you find yourself sort of digging in or researching into other parts of music that you hadn't had a chance to do before?
I feel like that's always been a part of my personality, and something I always do. When I'm performing, I am digging deep. I am constantly researching and reading. And even after, the 10th, 20th, 30th performance of something, I'm still, the day of the concert, doing whatever research I can to find my own inspiration, because often I'm talking to audiences. I find that a really important part of my life as an artist, is sharing my thoughts about the piece, or my experience with the piece, or how I feel about the music. And that's often informed by that search that I do. I own a million books, but also it's amazing that we have the internet to look things up and read, and there's so much coming out all the time about it. And so that's a part of what I've always done, I think. So that hasn't changed for me necessarily at this time. I think what did change a lot during this pandemic time is just trying to figure out where the inspiration comes from. In the past, I've had so many concerts, and I'm always learning something new for a concert. And when you're preparing for a concert, there's that inspiration, right? There you go. This is what I'm doing. Well, when the concerts go away, how do you keep working? What is it that keeps you going? That is the big question. And that does make us all, I think, dig a little deeper. So, I began to work on a couple of pet projects that I didn't quite have the time. I had ideas for, but didn't have the time for. So that's a little bit how I've spent the time.
That sounds really nice too, being able to sort of get back to things that are meaningful in other parts of your life, to sort of complete you as an artist.
Yeah.
It's important to feed our souls, it's important to go out there and work and do our career, but it's also important to figure out what's meaningful to us outside of that as well.
Well, and it's something I've been curious about, like what's going to happen when everything starts opening up. I mean, everything's not going to just poof, open up. It'll be, bits and pieces. I mean, I've done some of the, of course, online performing and concertizing, and have learned a lot about how recording myself to put up there. It's not the same. I really miss the audience interaction. I miss the traveling and the being a part of that whole world and that life, so much so that it often feels like I can't breathe, which is ironic, of course, in this time, the the breathing metaphor there, but it is because when you figure out what it is you want to do, and then that's taken away from you, that's very hard to sort of figure out how to move forward. So it has the first thing that happened for me was the thing that kept me practicing in those early days was I decided I was going to start at the beginning of the Bach suites and play at least a movement a day and go through every day. And it kept me. And so there's 36 movements. So that's the first 36 days. And then I was like, okay, I'm doing it again. And then a third time. These were all times I had basically barely left the house. And that's what, even if I was having a hard day because things were upsetting and friends were ill and, whatever was happening, at least I knew, oh, yeah, I have to get the cello out of the case because today I've got to work on this movement of Bach. and then that just began to become a thing that I would do and fell in love with doing. And it's not that I didn't always practice Bach, I always did, but this was it had a different meaning to me. And I'd had an idea in mind to commission companion pieces to the suites, and I was then decided to move forward with that project and have a plan to present those. But so far I've received 3 out of the 6 commissions. And so I'm beginning to learn those and figure out about, how to pair them and present them. So that'll be fun, eventually leading up to a recording project of the 12 pieces, the 6 suites and the 6 companions.
As a lover of the Bach suites, I certainly will be looking out for that. It sounds amazing.
That will be fun. Yeah. No, and the one thing that had happened, one thing that kind of halted a project I was in the middle of, but I somehow figured out how to get it done, was I was in the middle of recording all the Beethoven music for cello and piano, or I should say for piano and cello, because that's how he wrote it. That's what he said. And so there's 9 works, and I was 2/3 of the way done, and was supposed to complete them last June. And of course, the studio's closed down. We were able to get back in September last year, and so they're in production now. So next September, my recording of the Beethoven cello works will be released. So that's exciting too, being able to dig into that and think about that a lot too.
That's great. It sounds like, not just having the Bach there for you to ground you and sort of stabilize every day, you've got things on the horizon that you're looking forward to as well.
That is helpful. And I don't know how else to live, because, it's like I always need to be looking forward to things. I was talking to my son just the other day, and we were talking about when things open up again, where would we travel? Because, we haven't been traveling. So it's like I wanted to put together a dream list of what kind of trips could we plan, because you start realizing, too, that those experiences are more important than anything, than any object that you might own. It's being able to be out there in the world and see how things operate differently in different countries or in different cities, and I want to make sure that he gets to experience that too.
Well, now you've got me curious. What's one of the places on your dream list?
Oh my goodness. Well, so I have favorites that he hasn't been to, so I would like to take him to those. And those include, I lived in Prague for a little while, and I would love to show him Prague. And if we're going to be in Prague, we must go to Vienna because, it's right there. Budapest isn't that far away. And then we can start doing this big trip of all that too. And I was actually just before we got on the phone together, I was messaging with a friend in Iceland, and of course there's been this big volcanic activity over there, and they're like, oh, wish you could see the volcano. Well, I'd like to see that too, and my son would love that. So yeah, the list is long. I've been to every state in the US, but of course there are places I haven't been within those states that I'd like to go to, and so I have lists like that as well. So probably start out with that before the bigger travel once things open up again.
It definitely sounds like it'd be a fun trip once you get it going.
I think so. I hope so.
Yeah, I think everyone, especially after all these events, I'm sure a lot of people have sort of bucket travel lists going.
Yeah, it is. We've all been armchair travelers, if you will. I think, I'm always looking at things online or watching a show about a town or cooking in some place or, that I think, oh, I'd like to put that on the list, and we'll see. And then you also realize at a certain point in your life, it's like that you should be doing that traveling now and not even, often people push it off till later. And I think if you push it off till too late, it's just not comfortable to travel anymore.
And speaking of traveling, obviously you traveled a lot for work as a musician. Is there a favorite place that you traveled or place you performed?
Oh, it's funny. I often will ask, people will say, where's the favorite place you've played, or what was your favorite concert? And it relates for me so much more to the audience that we've played for. So if you have a rapt audience, that's magical, no matter where it is. So the quartet played once for us in a concert in Austria in a tiny, tiny little church. No running water, no electricity, no backstage area. So we had to, and actually the entire audience had to walk in. They had to hike in to this little church. It was beautiful. And it was a Sunday, and they all had on, and I'm not even kidding here, they had on their dirndls and their lederhosen. And these are people that are, professional people, lawyers, doctors, whatever. And they came in, and we were lit by candelabras, and it was packed. There were 40 people, and that's all that could fit there. And we played this program. We came in from our minivan. So we were allowed to drive up to the venue, only us. And we sort of walked in from the minivan and presented this concert. And it felt very like it could be any time. It wasn't modern times necessarily. It didn't matter. And we were playing this great music, and that was wonderful. But I also love playing in the big concert halls too, or even in someone's living room if they're listening carefully. Those are my best experiences.
That sounds very magical.
It was. It really was.
I would have been nervous though if I was performing with all the candles nearby.
It's true. I don't think there was any injury there. No hot wax and no, it was a little interesting though, but we needed them because it was a little dim inside that little church. So
that definitely sounds like fun. And, certainly one of the perks of being able to be a traveling musician. And of course, now you're also a pedagogue. And I was wondering, what is it like balancing that pre-pandemic? And do you have any advice for people who want to sort of pursue that dual track?
Yeah, I really feel like one informs the other. So I was a performing musician, like exclusively, pretty much for 20, 25 years. And then came into the tenure track of professorship a little later. But what I find with my students teach me as much as I teach them. So I'm looking into what inspires them. How do they work well? I mean, I have enough of my own ideas of how to work on pieces. And of course, I love etudes. I have a weird, strange passion for etudes. So I always know how to, bring the right etude in for them. But I'm mostly curious about how do they feel about something? How can I sort of direct their development in a direction where they can be curious and sort of find their own way based on what they want to become. So, and that's pretty much, I think, how I've found my way. I try to teach them things like no one will care as much about your career as you will. I learned that early on. I mean, not even your mom. You're the one who's going to be caring the most about it. So make sure you're taking care of it. And I'm talking to my students about looking around at who they're working with now, because that's your network, and networking is so important. Who you meet as you're playing or working together. I mean, look, that you and I know each other from my travels, and staying in touch with people and being curious about what they're doing, being supportive of others around you. I think these are lessons that I've learned from my own career that I bring to my students, certainly. So the two really go hand in hand. And often I find it delightful when my students are working on a piece that I happen to be performing that year. Often that's on purpose, right? If I know I have a concerto performance coming up and one of my students is right at that point where they need to be learning Dvorak concerto. So I almost say to them, let's learn it together. Let's explore this together. Because I think that what I'm showing them is, here's the bucket of tools that I use when I approach a piece of music. Let's fill your bucket of tools with, how do we look at that? I have it's a page of questions I give my students called compelling practice questions for curious cellists. And it involves things like, how is my body feeling as I'm playing? Does this fingering serve the musical intent that I have? Have I tried every possible bowing? Have I been curious and done my research about the piece? Do I know who inspired it? It's all those and there's more. There's like 13 questions on there, but it's exactly how I work. So I think the two things do go together. Now, the harder part, which you have to look at as well, is how do you fit it all in? How do you have a family life, a teaching life, and a performing life? And that I don't sleep as much as I should. I become very good at organizing, because you have to know when, okay, I have only this hour and a half here to practice this day because I'm teaching 6 hours and I'll be completely wiped at the end of that day. So I must do my practicing then. So sort of planning ahead is really important. I talk to my students a lot about planning. So that's important. And we plan, as I say, macro and micro. So I have by my side in my practice room all the time, I have a big whiteboard. And I have, I call it the magic of the whiteboard. And I write down a couple times a year, I'll go through and I'll do a bigger, these are the things that the projects, my dream projects. This is what I'd like to be working on. And they can range from recordings to performances to other topics. It could be also, physical health topics. So I'll have all those. And then I have notebooks, and I love notebooks. I have a ridiculous amount of notebooks where I'm writing ideas down all the time. I have idea books. I have planning books where I'm sort of saying, okay, here's how I'm going to get that project done. Because I've always had many more ideas than I have time and energy and money to do. So
it sounds like you've got a really great handle on all of that. And like you said, organizing is such an important part of it.
That's something else to teach teach people how to do. And not everybody's good at that. Some people actually work best under a deadline. Some people they need a long period of time for that. But I think that if I can sort of show them, sort of lead them along with that and then say, oh, see, you did that. How did we do that? Let's look back. Wow. Okay. Step by step. That's how you do that. Right. So even if you're a brand new player, a brand new student looking at, okay, from point A to point B, how do you get there? If you spent 10 minutes every day on something, after a month, how much better are you going to be after, just with that 10 minutes? 10 minutes is nothing, right? After a year, how good are you going to be at that? If you keep it up. Problem is we all lose interest, right? And it's hard to keep that discipline going. So that is part of our craft, though. It's a craft. And I think everyone forgets, whether you're watching baseball players or basketball players or whatever. I mean, if I watch somebody make it that 3-point shot in, March Madness, I watch that and I think, how many times have they been practicing that 3-point, that shot from the 3-point line? How many times have I practiced that shift from here to there? It doesn't just happen by magic. It happens because the craft has been worked on. And that's important to think about too.
Yeah. Scales, arpeggios, etudes. I mean, it doesn't matter which instrument you're playing. I mean, they're so vital for being able to transcend those skills onto the music and then onto the audiences.
And teaching people that it's part of the process of leading up to something else. Because if you become good at those, then everything else becomes easier. And then you can just step beyond that and look at the music, and it's not scary having to go up into that nosebleed section of the cello or whatever you want to call it. No, you've already been up there plenty. So it's like it just becomes a natural thing you can do.
And you said you love etudes. I'm just curious, what's your favorite cello etude book?
I love the Duport Etudes. Duport was a French cellist who, and there were two brothers, actually, the Duport brothers, who were, court cellists for the Prussian court, right? And it was Beethoven wrote his early cello music because he heard the Duport brothers play. But there are these beautiful etudes, and it's 2 cello parts. So if I assign a student a Duport etude, I can come in and play the second part with them. And then that's a lot more fun. I think it feels more like a great piece of music. So, but it's how do I choose? I mean, I love the simple ones and I love the hard ones. And actually, I remember a number of years ago, somebody introduced me to, there's a CD of Janos Starker playing etudes. And some of them are 20-second long etudes, tiny little first position things, so beautiful. And then you realize, wait, it's beautiful from that all the way to when he's playing Kodai Sonata or whatever it is. It's this is the level of playing we're at. So if you can bring that same attention to that short etude, you can probably bring it to everything else too if you work that way.
And that's a really beautiful sentiment, really having a clear goal, a clear passion. I mean, whatever a person's doing in the creative arts, being able to focus on that and, like you said, buckle down and figure out what works for them. They can achieve essentially whatever it is that they need to do. It's really up to us.
And so often the hardest part, and I used to talk about this with my colleagues, was the hardest part sometimes is getting the instrument out of the case. Because we can always find things that we need to do. Oh, I need to clean that, or I need to answer that email or whatever. But once you get it out of the case or whatever it is, you sit down to play, then you can get your work done. But that's sometimes the hardest thing. And I found that pretty much across the board when I talk to artists, no matter what level they're at, that's always the getting started. And some people have a really good sense of I get up and the first thing I do in the morning is this. And that's, I found when I was just out of college, I think that I discovered a little, philosophy for myself where it was, if I had gotten an hour practiced on and a workout by noon, nothing could ruin my day. After that, I could practice another 6 hours, or I could not practice at all, but nothing could ruin my day because I at least got these things done. So I began to work to make sure that was done. Noon is an arbitrary time, but yeah, at that time that worked for me. It's harder when you have more, stresses on your time, when you have a family or you have other people you have to help take care of too.
I completely understand that about getting it out of the case. I admit with my work, I use other instruments more than some of the ones that I grew up playing. And it's like, oh, it's getting dusty over there.
10 minutes. That's all you need.
That's right. Jennifer said so.
10 minutes, but every day, So that's been an interesting thing, having a child who studies music. So my son plays piano and clarinet, and just sort of teaching him that it has to be a daily process, even if there are other things. There's a lot of homework. There's other things going on. Nope, we practice every day. It's just what we do. It doesn't have to be a ton of time, but it's the daily thing, and not that, oh, I forgot to, and now at the end of the week, I'm going to try to do a ton. No, it's that. And now I don't even have to ask anymore. He just does it for both instruments. So.
Oh, that's always good.
I know. We'll see.
Right. How long that streak lasts, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I don't think he loves music, but I don't think that will be, I think he's going to go more into science, math type of things, but I think the music will always be there. It's a good friend and a comfort, and something to be social with others to do as well.
Very true. Very true. So you've of course led a very illustrious career across different things. Did you ever imagine you'd become a university professor?
It was not what I started out wanting to do, for sure. I come from a line of university professors. My father was a biology professor. My grandfather before him was a chemistry professor, and then went into administration and was like dean of the graduate school, and then vice president of University of Southern California. So I come from this line of teachers and professors. My sister's a professor of dance at the University of Calgary. So it's all out there. But no, I hadn't really, performance was what I always wanted to do. But there does come a point where you feel compelled to share what you have learned and what you know. And I find the two hand in hand really working well in terms of that. So I'm sharing learning in that way, because when you have to think about how to talk about what you're doing, it takes it to a different level. I know some people who are fantastic players and they can't explain what they're doing. They haven't analyzed it necessarily. But if you have, and then you can share it and watch the development, there's something that's thrilling about that. I love watching my students grow. And sort of that aha moment when they realize, especially if they listen back, I make them record themselves a lot and video. And so we look back at something they did last year or 2 years ago or whatever. And there's this, wow. Because as we're studying music, our ears are developing faster than what our abilities are doing. So I remember this from music school. I started sounding worse to myself. And I had a teacher who took me aside and said, actually, no, you are improving at a very nice rate. Your ears have just grown so much that you just sound worse. So it's like the scales are falling off of the ears and you begin to hear what you need to do. And then eventually they'll line back up, one hopes anyway. But that's something to teach everyone to be patient and to trust a process is really important too. Because anytime you look back, you go, oh, I used to be there. Now I'm here. And this is, I've done that work. I've worked on that craft. It is definitely better now.
Definitely agree on trusting the process. And not only once you find the process that works for you, and then trusting it, because I completely understand. There was a point where I was like, oh man, I really do suddenly sound so horrible on everything I pick up, and like you said, you adjust, and you grow and you learn and you just keep going. And then of course, ultimately you pass on the knowledge to future generations to keep the art going.
I had a funny thing happen when the shutdown happened, which was I suddenly noticed that everything I played sounded out of tune to myself. Now, I teach my students this all the time. The first thing everybody notices about you, no matter what instrument you play, is your sound. The second thing they notice about you is whether you play out of tune or not, or in tune, out of tune. Intonation is usually the second thing. So, but I just felt like everything I was doing was not in tune. And so I thought, well, okay, this is an opportunity to step back. I have the time now. Let's reevaluate how it is that I tune things. What am I listening for? Has my ear, suddenly grown in a different way? And so I began, this is part of the curiosity, the digging in. I began to do some research about how do other people teach technique of intonation for intonation to, how do you work on that? Of course, I know drones. Of course, I know, tuning chords or looking at fifths and perfect intervals and things. But it was beyond that. It was something subtle and very complex. And I'm still working on that. So that's kind of a fun thing that's happened. I panicked at first when I noticed it, and I had to ask people. I was like, do I sound really out of tune? Do you know? No. People were like, no, you sound fine. So I thought, okay, something is happening in my development. Again, trust that process. But do the work. Trust the process, but do the work.
Very true. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I guess your cello wasn't misbehaving then, huh? Can't blame it on the cello.
I wish. Yeah, I know that would be the easy thing. I never blame it on the cello. Actually, I love it when I go to the cello doctor and they're like, "Oh, wow, your cello is really out of, whack here." And I say, "Oh, thank God it wasn't just me." But I will never blame the cello. I always think I'll always come back to me.
Because it's an extension of us and who we are and what we do.
Exactly.
Yes. Although there's something to be said for a good old new set of strings, and some rosin on your bow.
Oh, yes. My students, that's another one. Have you rosined today is one of my big questions. So first thing, if somebody's sounding a little off, I'm like, did you rosin today? Oh, you didn't? Okay. Let's rosin first, then we'll talk about sound.
Yes. I'm always surprised. It's like, I haven't rosined in 2 weeks, and they're so proud of that. And I'm like, what?
How do you, well, I have this great photograph from a bow maker of what under a microscope, and of course, this is the biologist's daughter, talking that under a microscope of what the bow hair looks like with rosin and without. And it really shows that there are all these little teeth when there's rosin on there. So it's like, that's what you want. You want to have that grip, that tension to pull the string.
So this is a sort of a quirky question I like to ask musicians, that if you had intro music or a theme song for your life, what would that be?
My goodness. I have probably 5 of them. So depending on my mood, how about that? So it would either have to be like the opening of the cello part of the Dvorak cello concerto. Right? We've got that. When I'm feeling triumphant, we'll do dum da da dum. Or if I'm feeling a little more wistful, it might be that Elgar long theme, da, 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 that long one, right? But I don't think I've talked to you about my long love of female jazz vocalists. I have especially Ella Fitzgerald is just, if you want to make me happy, put on some Ella for me. And so some of her, this will sound wrong that I talk about this being a theme song, but The Lady is a Tramp is a great one, has such a great big band feel to it, or Sophisticated Lady is one that's a little more sad, like that one. What a Wonderful World. Let's get a little Louis Armstrong in there too. Yeah, so that's a lot, but I guess depending on the mood, right?
And those are all excellent songs.
Yes, of course.
Or pieces in some cases, yeah. Sort of along those lines, if you could have dinner with any creative person, who would that be?
I probably have a couple in mind. First off would be Thomas Jefferson. Which is unusual maybe for a musician to think about, but I think I recently read about Monticello and some of his life there, and actually I visited Monticello as well, and I just was so impressed with how much he traveled, how much he read, how much he knew, how much he wrote, how much he knew about music. I think that would be a really interesting dinner. or time spent. And besides which, having visited his dining hall there, he apparently, after traveling, he had people study, his cooks were studying. He brought like French cooking to Virginia, and apparently grew there in Monticello. He grew something like 250 different types of fruits and vegetables, and his tables were filled with more of that fresh stuff and then a little less meat. And he also had an incredible wine cellar, and was the first person to bring things like, or make things like ice cream. And so I'm just fascinated with all of his inventions and what he was looking at that time. And then I think second would be Da Vinci, and I think I would want to have a picnic with Da Vinci out in a field somewhere where he was trying out some of his inventions. And I want to look at his notebook. I have no idea what we would eat because I don't really know much about his diet. But I think that seems like that would be something on plein air. We want to be outside for that. So, but impressive. Everything, I've read a lot about him, and between the art and the inventions and the science and his study, his curiosity is something that appeals to me. So
definitely a very inspiring to so many interesting lives they've led too.
Exactly. Yeah. So when I see anything about those two, I certainly want to know more. I mean, there's so many people. There's so many impressive people out there. It's hard to choose, right?
Before we go, what are some of the best resources you'd recommend for cellists?
I think there's an incredible site that Paul Katz started called Cello Bello, cellobello.org, I think it is. But it's easy to find if you just look up Cello Bello. Bello is spelled just like cello. Cellobello. And they do master classes, and there's a lot of books, and there's a lot of videos to watch on there, and there are talks by every week they have a talk by a cellist. I'm actually doing one with them in May, talking about different subjects with cello playing from beginning to more advanced. And it really is an impressive site to study. When I was going on that deep dive into what is going on with my intonation, this is a very much more advanced book, but Hans-Jürgen Jensen's Cello Mind book, it really came to my rescue. I began to buy a lot or look at a lot of different books that people have written about cello playing. And if you're just starting out a little more, just going back to some of the basics and listening carefully. The Sebastian Lee books, the Juilliard books, the Kummer book, all of those are your more basic etude books that really show you how to do things from beginning to end. And it's nice if you have a teacher helping you with that. But I have found at different points in my life, just spending 30 minutes going back to those basics, even if it's just whole tones, really cleanses things and helps me make things better.
Excellent. That's a really great list, and I'll go ahead and put those in the show notes for people to be able to click and find those. Is there anything else you would like us to know before we sign off?
No, be more curious. Actually, I would temper that with my students. I'm like, be more curious and be more excellent. Those are the things that we're always looking for.
Wonderful. Well, what a great sentiment to end on. And thank you again, Jennifer Kloetzel, professor and cellist.
Thank you, Tammy. This has been fun.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.